If only his eyes could show the light that others couldn't see. The emotions buried deep in his heart had always been a source of questions, like a blurry reflection that couldn't be cleared by the passage of time. He was always submerged in his feelings, sometimes in waves of joy, other times in the depths of sorrow. But this emotional storm could never be shown to anyone, for in older times, people like him were trained to hide their emotions, and their world was always in shades of black and white. In a world where emotional expression had no room, he silently endured the tempest within him. In a world where emotional expression was viewed as a weakness, he lived a life bound by invisible chains of family expectations. The sunlit morning would creep into the modest home, casting soft, warm rays over the furniture, illuminating the mundane routine that dictated every day. Each member of the family moved with purpose, their actions automatic, devoid of any personal reflection or emotional exploration. There was always something to do, tasks that kept everyone busy, leaving little space for anything but the practicalities of life. He stood by the window, staring out at the garden, where the flowers bloomed in the sunlight. But his eyes, lost in thought, saw little of the vibrant colors and the lively world outside. He could hear the voices of his family members, yet their words felt distant and foreign. They spoke in measured tones, their conversations never straying far from daily matters or responsibilities. Laughter was rare. Feelings of sorrow, joy, or even confusion were often brushed aside or ignored, as though they did not fit into the rigid framework of family life. Growing up, he had been taught that emotions were a luxury, something to be indulged in only when absolutely necessary. Strength, resilience, and control were the virtues that were praised. He could never show his true feelings, for fear that he would be seen as weak or unworthy. There was always a quiet, unspoken rule in the family. Emotions are for the vulnerable. We are not weak. As a child, he had often wondered about the silence in his house, the absence of open displays of affection. When he had fallen and scraped his knee, his mother would briefly soothe him with gentle words, but there were no hugs, no prolonged moments of comfort. His father, the pillar of the household, would give him a firm pat on the back and send him back to his chores, never acknowledging the tears that threatened to spill from his eyes. This was how they dealt with things in his family, swiftly, silently, and with little regard for the emotions that lay beneath the surface. He had learned, over time, to suppress his own feelings. He had become an expert at hiding his pain, his joys, his fears. To feel too deeply was to risk the disapproval of those around him, and to seek solace in his emotions was a form of weakness he could not afford. The warmth of the sunlight outside, the beauty of the world just beyond the window, seemed so distant to him. He longed to express what he felt inside, but he knew the cost would be too high. Instead, he retreated further into himself, a silent prisoner of his own emotional world. The weight of his unspoken emotions pressed on him, but he carried it silently, like a shadow following him everywhere he went. His family had no idea that beneath the facade of composure, a storm raged inside him. And as the sun moved higher in the sky, the world outside remained bright and vivid, while he remained in his quiet, emotional isolation. It was a warm afternoon when he first saw her. She was sitting beneath the large oak tree in the village park, her fingers gently tracing the petals of a flower as if lost in thought. The sunlight dappled through the leaves, creating patches of light that danced across her face. There was something in her calm presence, something that seemed to draw him in without effort. He stood at a distance, watching her quietly, feeling an unfamiliar flutter in his chest. It was a feeling he had never known before, an emotion that stirred something deep inside, something he had been taught to suppress for so long. He hadn't planned on meeting her, but their paths crossed by chance. She looked up, and their eyes met. In that brief moment, everything seemed to stop. The busy chatter of the park, the rustling of the trees, the distant calls of children playing, all of it faded into the background. It was as though time stood still, and the world became smaller, more intimate. He felt his heart race, and for the first time, he allowed himself to smile. But it was a small, restrained smile, as if he knew better than to allow too much emotion to show. She smiled back, but it was a polite, measured smile, one that suggested she was aware of the boundaries of their world. In that fleeting exchange, he could sense something deeper between them, yet the weight of societal expectations pressed heavily upon him. They were not supposed to show affection or openly express what they felt. In his world, feelings were meant to remain hidden, tucked away beneath layers of duty and obligation. His family's teachings echoed in his mind, telling him that such emotions, love in particular, were dangerous, unrefined, and out of place in the world they inhabited. As the days passed, they met by chance several more times, always in the same park, always with the same silence between them. He would steal glances at her from a distance, his heart heavy with the emotions he dared not express. Their conversations were brief and polite, the words never venturing into the realm of personal feelings. His love for her grew silently, like a seed planted deep within, nurtured by his longing but never allowed to bloom. He could not speak his truth, could not tell her of the emotions that stirred within him, for to do so would be to expose himself in a way that was forbidden. Her presence was both a comfort and a torment. The more he saw her, the more his heart yearned for something he could never have. Yet, in his world, the expression of love was a silent, hidden thing, an emotion to be cherished only in solitude. And so, he watched her from afar, locking his feelings away, his heart heavy with unspoken words and unfulfilled desires. In that silence, love was both a beautiful dream and a silent burden he could never share. The war came swiftly, like a storm that seemed to appear out of nowhere and ravage everything in its path. One day, his quiet village was alive with the sounds of everyday life. Children laughing in the streets, families gathering for dinner, and the hum of normalcy in the air. But the next day, the streets were silent, the air heavy with the weight of uncertainty. The world around him shifted, and so did he. His older brother, a young man full of life and ambition, was enlisted in the army. He had tried to hide his fears, always trying to be the brave son, the one who would never let his emotions show. But the morning his brother left, there was something in his eyes, something his family could not ignore. It was a mixture of sadness, fear, and a desperate longing to keep the family intact. His father had clasped his shoulder and told him not to worry, that his brother would be back soon, that this was just a duty he had to fulfill. But those words meant little now. There was no comfort in them, only a gnawing sense of helplessness. As the war dragged on, letters from his brother became less frequent. And then, one day, the inevitable news came. His brother, the one he had looked up to, the one who had always been the strong, silent figure, was gone. The details were vague: shrapnel, an explosion, a loss too sudden for anyone to process. But it didn't matter. His brother was gone, and with him, a part of the family's soul had been ripped away. The news hit like a blow to the chest, a sudden wave of grief that threatened to drown him. But there was no time for tears, no room for sorrow. He had been raised to believe that men didn't show weakness. His father, though clearly broken inside, managed to keep his composure, his face stoic and unreadable. His mother, too, held back her tears, perhaps in an effort to maintain some semblance of control. But as for him, he felt as though his heart was being torn apart, piece by piece. Yet, there was no one to turn to, no one who would understand the depth of his pain. He carried on as he always had, suppressing his grief and his emotions, as though they were an inconvenience. In the quiet of the night, when no one could see, he would let the tears fall in the privacy of his room. But even then, His heart remained heavy with the knowledge that his sorrow was something he could never openly share. The world had become a darker place, yet the facade of stoicism and control remained. He was not allowed to feel too much, for to do so would be to break the unspoken rules of his upbringing. The war had changed everything, and yet, in the end, it had changed nothing at all. He was still the silent observer of his own grief, still trapped in the prison of emotional restraint. In a village where religion held sway over every aspect of daily life, the young man found himself torn between faith and the suffocating silence of his own emotions. The church, an imposing structure of stone with stained glass windows that shimmered in the sunlight, stood at the heart of the village. It was both a sanctuary and a prison, a place where the people came to worship, to find solace, and yet, for him, it had come to symbolize something far more oppressive. From a young age, he had been taught that suffering was a part of God's divine plan, that every hardship, every grief, was a test of faith. It was a lesson drilled into him with the stern yet loving voice of his parents, with the echoes of the priest's sermons reminding him that suffering must be endured with grace. Emotions were to be controlled, because expressing pain or sorrow was seen as questioning God's will. If you showed too much grief, if you let your anger or sadness spill over, you were told that you lacked faith, that you didn't trust in God's wisdom. The young man had learned to accept this teaching, burying his grief under layers of religious doctrine. When his brother died, the priest had come to offer comfort. "He is in a better place now," the priest had said, a comforting but hollow sentiment. God takes those he loves most. But this phrase did little to ease the torment in his heart. Instead of finding comfort, he felt a growing disconnect between what he was being taught and the pain he felt deep within. The teachings of the church were clear. Endure. Be patient. The Lord knows what is best for you. But what about the emotions that raged inside him? What about the sorrow that came with loss? The anger that simmered when he thought about the cruelty of war? These were emotions that didn't fit neatly into the box of religious teaching. He had tried to pray for peace, to ask for guidance, but his heart felt heavy with unanswered questions. Was it wrong to feel? Was it wrong to want to scream out in the face of such overwhelming grief? As days passed, he found himself drifting further from the comfort the church was supposed to provide. Every Sunday, when the congregation gathered to pray, he would sit in the back, lost in thought. The sermons seemed distant, the prayers mechanical. He no longer felt the same connection to the divine that he once had. He began to wonder if his inability to express his grief, his refusal to confront his emotions, was slowly eroding his faith. The silent weight of emotional suppression, supported by the church's teachings, grew heavier and heavier until it became almost unbearable. But he said nothing. To speak of his doubts, to question what he had been taught, would be to open a door that, once opened, could never be closed. So he remained silent, following the motions, praying with the rest, but inside he struggled. Caught between the belief that his emotions were a weakness and the nagging feeling that perhaps, just perhaps, it was okay to feel. It was a quiet afternoon when he finally reached the point of no return, a tipping point where the weight of his own suppressed emotions became unbearable. The village was still, the streets empty in the midday heat, as though the entire world had paused to watch him. He walked alone toward the edge of the village, his feet taking him without thought to the open fields beyond, the place where the world stretched out before him, vast, open, and untouched. It was here, away from the boundaries of his family, his faith, and his duties, that he could breathe. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to stop, to stand still, and to feel. The weight of his grief, the years of pain and silent struggle, seemed to flood his body all at once. He could hear his own breath, feel the warmth of the sun on his skin, and yet, for the first time, the world around him didn't feel like a cage. He closed his eyes and stood, allowing himself to be present, to be vulnerable. There were no walls here, no expectations, no duties to perform. The freedom of the open sky felt infinite, like a canvas he had never been allowed to touch. He thought of his brother, gone far too soon, of the quiet grief that had been locked inside him for years. He remembered his love for the woman he had never been able to express, the emotions he had buried deep within, thinking they were weaknesses. And now, standing in the middle of the field, with nothing but the horizon before him, he realized how much he had been carrying all this time. Tears welled up in his eyes, not from weakness, but from the overwhelming release of everything he had kept locked away. His heart ached, but it wasn't the same kind of ache he had known before. This time, it was a kind of cleansing, a purging of all the emotions that had been buried for far too long. He felt both the pain and the relief at once, as if every tear that fell was a testament to the strength it took to finally let go. For the first time, he didn't try to hide. He didn't fight the pain or try to suppress his feelings. The sun shone brightly above him, and the gentle breeze wrapped around him like a soft embrace. He allowed himself to grieve, to feel love, and to embrace every emotion without fear of judgment. In this moment, he understood that emotions weren't burdens. They were his true self, his connection to the world around him. When he opened his eyes, everything felt different. He felt different. The weight that had hung on his shoulders for so long was gone, replaced by a sense of freedom and clarity. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to truly be. The man who had once hidden his emotions behind a mask now stood in the sunlight, unashamed and fully present. The storm inside him had calmed, and in its place was peace. He was no longer just surviving. He was living, and that was enough.